last time I talked about wholesome thinking because Peter says the purpose of this, his second letter, is to stimulate his friends, his dear friends, to wholesome thinking. We, I don't think wholesome thinking gets very much airtime these days, but for a Christian, wholesome thinking it deserves some solid thinking and thought. Um, I think, well, one of the places in the New Testament where this idea of wholesome thinking takes form is we talked about a little bit last time, Philippians 4:8, where Paul lays out a filter of good, wholesome, noble, positive things to think about these things, he said. And then he follows that with, and the peace of Christ guards your hearts and minds. Well, one of the other places in the New Testament that Paul writes about what I think fits in this bucket of wholesome thinking is in Romans chapter 12. Now, probably have heard lots of sermons about the first two verses of Romans 12. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So much could be said about that. It'd be worth days and days of meditation and study and thought on that. But then he goes on, and this is verse 2. Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by what? By better behavior? No. By more clear, durable theology? No. By the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So Paul frames up this wholesome thinking and says it's the result of a renewed mind. How do you renew your mind? Well, okay, I don't want to go too deeply into this because it's a bunny trail that goes a long ways. But it's worth taking a look, just at least down the trail. One of the ways that the mind is renewed is a little bit like, how is the body renewed? Well, there are a few things that renew the body. One is rest, one is appropriate nutrition, and a third would be exercise. Now, I want to apply those over to the renewing of your mind. Rest. I think sometimes we've got the rest thing kind of mixed up in our head with something else. We think that resting the mind means thinking about nothing. Well, I don't think, I'm not referring to this in the transcendental meditation mode, where the point is to evacuate your mind. No, not so much. What I think, for me, one of the ways that my mind one of the things it needs rest from is worry. And you know, there are varying degrees of worry, all the way back from pure panic to reasonable, advisable even, concern. There are times when I need to be able to just push that away and rest, in the sense that my mind does not have to be taken up with problem solving, running scenarios, working out solutions. For a Christian, this amounts to what I have so often taken comfort in and promoted in all of Paul's letters in the introduction, and even in Peter's. He connects two things that make this kind of mind rest possible: grace and peace. This kind of rest is not possible without grace and peace. So there is that. Pause and think about this. One of the functions of the Sabbath from the Old Testament, and even in Jesus' day, its primary function was to rest. And part of that rest had to do with resting your mind, resting your soul. You rested your body and you rested your soul. It was not a day to solve problems. It was not a day to make financial investment plans and to plan the budget and to set up the coming week. Really, no. I mean, those things were considered work. It was 24 hours where you produced nothing, not even the solution to a problem. Okay, I'm probably pushing that a little farther than it generally would go. So, first thing is you rest. The second thing is nutrition. You know that old saying, you are what you eat. Well, I suppose to a large degree we are. And this is no less true in our soul, heart, and mind. What we consume, what goes into us, that matters. Our nutrition. So another point to pause and ponder is, what are you taking in? What is your mental, intellectual, and even emotional nutrition? Is it things that promote your closer walk with Christ, or is it things that inhibit your closer walk with Christ? See, that's really when you think about anything that you consume with your mind and heart. The bottom line question is, will this draw me closer to Christ, or will it pull me away from Him? I don't get the responsibility. Some people would think of it as a privilege. For me, it would be no privilege at all. It would be a burdensome responsibility to tell you what you can and cannot put into your mind and heart. But what I can do as a brother is to say, think about it. Pay attention. Be intentional about the emotional, mental, intellectual nutrition because it has a lot to do with renewing your mind. And then the third thing is exercise. How do we exercise our mind? When we were young and in school, every day was to some degree an exercise of the mind. But once you're out of school, then the exercise of your mind becomes very different. It is far less about ingraining or memorizing facts so that they can be regurgitated on an exam, and much more about sifting through the events, experiences, the data that comes our way so that we can organize it in a fashion that it helps us live more effectively, right? Okay. That's kind of an overstatement for you exercise your mind by thinking. I believe that that's a skill and an art that I know. I've already told you I lean toward the pessimistic side. My pessimistic realism, leads me to believe that American culture as a whole just doesn't think very much anymore. We don't process. We let somebody else process it for us. We like our information pre-digested. I suppose we do because the outlets for how pre-digested our information is continue to sell advertising and thrive enough to pay massive salaries to massive staff. I wonder if a very significant issue in the coming years. This is not a political thing. It, it, it there are political implications, but I am not choosing a political side when I say this. I'm not pointing the finger at either side, because the truth is both sides are guilty of telling us what events mean rather than granting us the dignity to think our way through to figure out what does that mean. Okay, that's a hobby horse, and you can tell I have real strong feelings, so I'm going to back away from that and come a little farther down onto the runway and just say you cannot put your brain on cruise control and be renewed. You cannot renew your mind by cruise control. There's an old saying from the 70s, really, that said a lot of times agnostics and atheists in debates would say, you Christians, you check your brains at the door. No, we can't do that. We cannot do that. There is this delicate balance between faith and thinking, between simply believing and trusting what we read of God's plan, design, and will, and our thoughtful processing of that. To renew your mind requires that you pay attention to rest, you pay attention to nutrition, you pay attention to exercise. And Peter writes that his primary purpose in writing to his friends, he calls them dear friends, was not just to provide them more information and a deeper perspective, but to stimulate them to wholesome thinking. Who in your life stimulates you to wholesome thinking? That's a pretty significant question. For me, I have several friends that when we are together, we end up in these deep and sometimes we don't agree on things. If you were just listening in, you'd say, man, these guys are in like conflict. Maybe. But we're testing ideas with each other. We're stimulating one another to think. I treasure these friendships. And then there are some authors, I feel that they're timeless authors that stimulate me to wholesome thinking. My top drawer, the top shelf on my mental bookshelf is C.S. Lewis. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant mind. And when I read him, even the Chronicles of Narnia and the Space Trilogy, and Till We Have Faces, his fiction books, they stimulate me to wholesome thinking. Not everybody likes C.S. Lewis. I get that. But you need to find somebody. I'll tell you another author that has been very helpful to me was a guy named John Ortberg, and I think I read about 5 or 6 of his books, and every one of them in its own way has been so helpful to stimulate me to wholesome thinking. One more, a guy named N.T. Wright. He's a Brit. Man, does that guy think well and deeply, and he's so articulate as an author. I believe that if you want to stimulate yourself to wholesome thinking, you've got to read, or at the very least get the book on Audible and listen. That's my challenge. Can you find something this week, start today, that will stimulate you to wholesome thinking? One of the books that will most do that is at an easy access to you, and that's your scriptures, the Bible. I want to present one idea. Why don't you take the book of Proverbs and read one chapter of Proverbs every day? In fact, let the calendar be your guide. You see, there are 31 chapters in Proverbs, and most months have 31 days. So you take the calendar date and you read that chapter. Just let it speak to you. And in a month, you will have gone through some of the wisest literature that's ever been penned. The point being, I want to stimulate you to wholesome thinking. And I hope I get to connect with you next time to do that some more on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.